Hello and welcome to another BuildASoil YouTube video. Today we have FAQ 8 from season 5. We're getting close to the end. It's just that I've not finished the trimming yet. I know you are patiently waiting, and I promise it'll be done in the next couple of days. So soon we'll have the final update video. And then we've already been recording content for season 6, and I'd like to announce all of those plans. That being said, this is an FAQ video. I'd like to jump right in. So if you've watched, you know how this goes. Dean, he edits the YouTube videos. He goes to the videos and he extracts a lot of the questions that are being asked. And then he puts them into an FAQ, sends it over to me, and then I don't look at it. Someone prints it out, gives it to me, we turn the camera on, and we do it straight up. So let me grab it right now. We'll see what we've got for the day. Reed says, do those moisture packs really work? I've used them 2 times and they took away the taste, all the way gone. And the smell was almost gone. In the past, I've put it in a big cure vault or mason jar. Should I keep trying the Boveda packs or just do it the old way? This is a really good question, and this is an experience that I've been through as well. We used to carry the packs. There's a number of brands out there, so I try and avoid using a brand name. There's Boveda, and there's a lot of others on the market. They're the biggest one. I actually started using them because Sea-Vault recommended it, and I did use Sea-Vaults. No longer. I don't like the Sea-Vaults as much. There's a number of reasons, but essentially, I never use those. I stopped using them a few months after we started carrying them and immediately discontinued selling them. I don't believe they're good. I believe what they do is they take someone and give them false insurance that it'll do a good job, and you can either put it in the jar too wet anyways and put the pack and it doesn't help, or you can put it too dry and use that to kind of re-moisten and it may not work ideally, because I experienced the same thing as you. I didn't like the terps, I didn't like what it did to the herb, but really, for me, at the end of the day, doing the slow dry into a jar, and a full jar, is the best way for me. And I've also noticed that I used to use big gallon jars, but when I was doing it like by genetic, because I want to keep the different flavors separate, I would end up having 1 gallon jar that wasn't full, maybe a quarter full, half full, and that much airspace in the jar would lead to not as good as a result. So when I put it away for longer term, I like to use just regular wide mouth jars so that about 2 ounces fit in the jar, depending on the density of the nug, and then I can set those aside. And when I go pop it, it's likely that I will go through that herb quick enough where it won't be a problem, or I will open the jar, separate some out into a smaller jar, and then reseal that one. And at least I don't have all that dead airspace in there that I think affects it. And then also from that, I just feel like across the board, everybody that I know that grows good flower, like 99% of people do not use those packs, and they kind of laugh at them, and they had the same experience that you did, that they cause problems more than they solve. And typically what happens is when you're a newer grower, we end up getting it into the jar a little bit too soon, and that moistness from the stem and the inside of the bud comes back out to what was the brittle feeling outside edges, and then we have to start burping. And that's why we have a whole video, or several of them, on drying and curing. My belief is that when you harvest properly and you hang a whole plant or large branches, and you do a very slow dry, 14, 15, 16, up to 20 days, maybe drop the humidity just slightly if it's not finishing, and then go into the jar at that point, that is the dry and the cure all in one. It can benefit from a little jar time. Some herbs get better after a few weeks or so, but I really like fresh once it's been slow dried, either right away or within a few weeks is usually my favorite. 6 months out, even if it's perfectly cured, I don't think it's as good as when it's fresher. There's the Canitrol, there's other devices that keep everything in this ideal humidity, temperature, and environment. Those may add a little bit of time, but at the end of the day, I think that flower is good, you know, within a 6-month period. It can totally go longer, but it's best in that period, and it's best without the Boveda or without any of those humidity packs, and it's done with a slow dry. Drying is so important, and this is a really good question. I'm really glad Dean threw this in here. As far as Sea-Vault, I don't like them just because of the shape. I don't like clunking off all 3 levers and then opening it and then putting it back on. I have to set the lid somewhere, and then it gets dirty and I want to clean it, and then I can't fit it in my pocket. So a 2-ounce jar I can fit in my sweatshirt. They just feel better to me for whatever reason, so I kind of ditched all of that, went back to glass. That's my absolute favorite. What I do is, besides all the glass, where those are my A-buds, a lot of times I'll take B's and C's, depending on how much quantity of the B's I have, and I'll just put them in some, like the freeze dryer Mylar bags that I have, or some turkey bags, and then I'll process that later. But all of my flour that I like to smoke goes in the jar. All right, I should probably make sure I don't do such long answers. There's a lot of questions. Walton says, I'm curious, when doing cover crop, after you drop and add some amendments and compost, how long do you wait before dropping in the new plant? Oh, that's a good question. So really you can do it right away. It's not a big deal. But if we're hoping to chop and drop the cover crop and the amendments and hoping that some of those will be worked into the matrix of the soil, will actually be available from a fertility perspective instead of for the long term, then what I usually do is if you can cover it, it's even better. So like Jean Martin Fortier, I believe, from Canada, they're no-till, but they'll grow cover crop, and what they want to do is they use a machine that like flops the cover crop over with a couple inches of soil, and they do it down their whole bed, but they need to plant into it. And especially in a commercial garden, like it's got to be dialed in. You can't just plant plants wherever you want. And so what they'll do is they'll cover that with a black plastic, and then 2 weeks later, under the heat, that just all turns into soil, and they pull it back off, and then they can make their beds and plant into it. Indoors, it's different. Like if you just chop and drop and your lights are on and it's just raw sitting there dry, it may take a while. If you cover it, maybe with some trash bags or a big piece of cardboard or something, it might go a little bit faster. But in my experience, ideally, what I'm gonna do for season 6, I've got cover crop going now. It's not gonna get huge and woody. It's gonna be pretty young, and that's tender, and it breaks down pretty easy when it's young cover crop. I'm gonna chop and drop it all, put some amendments in, and ideally in the next, if I wait at least 2 weeks, I think I get a really big benefit from that. I watered in, I covered a little bit, the microbes go crazy, the worms come up, stuff starts to get really, really broken down in that 2 week period, and then I plant back into it. You could wait a month if you wanted to. You could plant into it the day after you chop and drop. I will say, if you chop and drop a lot, work it into the soil, and add a whole bunch of amendments, it'll actually heat up that top layer of soil. It'll warm quite a bit. So waiting that week or two is probably the best practice. So that's my answer. Nathan says, in regards to music, I was just at SIU talking and touring with one of the grad students, and his thesis studies about different hertz or vibrations, a speaker on a metal scrognet, and how it affects the growth. So far, he's had positive results showing that 200 hertz, 15 minutes per hour are good for growth, something for all of us to pay attention to. That's interesting. I will say that if you were to go read Masanobu Fukuoka's One Straw Revolution, he says beware of the scientist that focuses on too narrow of an area, not noticing the other differences that come along with. And I always keep that as a caveat. And I don't think that we're going to find a way to produce faster growing, healthier plants by altering the sound a little bit. But there's some truth to what is being found there. And it's possible that he's tapping into that, and maybe there's some amazing information. There are some books by Callahan. The Callahan meter is what they use to test the, like for instance, basalt can be high in paramagnetic energy. And there's whole books on how that energy has been used over history, as well as how it might affect gardening. And so you can measure that. And there's books on like the frequency and tuning into that of nature, what pests and birds and insects and other things may use as far as an energy level, and how that might affect plant growth. So I wouldn't rule it out, but at the same time, it's more just interesting to me, because at the end of the day, like if I were to compare it to jiu-jitsu, what you learn as far as fundamentals are the most important. Some of these really flashy moves that might work are very low percentage submissions and unlikely to be like what you should focus on. The fundamentals are everything. But I will say, I'm fascinated by some of the crazy moves, you know, barambolos and flying triangles and all that stuff. They're awesome. They're just not what most of my effort goes into learning, and it's the same in gardening. So thanks for sharing that, Nathan. I will actually look more into it. Other things, there's been some old studies on music. A lot of times there was some part of it that they weren't calculating, like the vibration actually pushed air, and that air was slightly warmer, and it changed the environment. So who knows? I'd love to look into his study. Alvin Kaz, the question one has to ask themselves is, does nature flush? You could say rain occurs, but there is a continued cycle within that soil food web that exists for a long distance. Plant roots can travel a long, long distance. Synthetics are flushed out because they are chemical poison that is directly absorbed by the plant. Whereas living soil and natural fertilizers are done in a complex system that is done safely. Why waste the last 2 weeks and not give nutrients? I will say that I find it interesting you only recommend water coconut powder for the last weeks, but it seems like you say the last week you don't need nutrients and that there would be enough in the plant soil to finish off. Yes and no. So while the plant's finishing, a lot of times it's still in its ripening, fattening phase. And so it really depends, right? But we've seen increase in yield by adding potassium towards the end, just like you would in a regular hydroponic grow. And adding those sugars and allowing it to not have to spend energy towards the end when it's in decline to get some of that, I feel like May not be what nature would do, but it is a little bit of hack for what we're after out of the plant. And also, growers have been using sugars towards the end for a long time. I know that some of our best growers swear by some of these tactics, and the hash comes out phenomenal. And so I think that keeps a lot of us there until we have better data. And I also don't think it's just one thing that we do. A lot of people that do these things, they care a lot. And so they're doing many things that contribute to that final outcome. And as far as nature flushing and all this, you know, there's a lot to be said about that. So when I first started growing, you know, the BuildASoil way, people would be like, well, if you like nature so much, why don't you just throw a seed outside and do nothing and see what happens? We have to step in at some point. Some of my early grows that were most impressive were from when I had a seed that randomly popped and took hold outside because I would dump old soil. And they were amazing. So I do think nature has a lot of power, but let's consider this. Earthworms, they're kind of an invader. And so it used to be that the forest floor was worked by fungus, and that was what provided the fertility. Now it's said that the earthworms are actually causing a problem because they're decaying and turning that mulch layer and all the leaves so quickly into nutrients, it can actually be a problem for the forests. And so even though I've talked about flushing and nutrients and all this, you can still have a buildup of water-soluble nutrients based on the soil. It's less likely, but when you have really biological soil, you're top dressing a lot, there could still be some free excesses. And so a tiny bit of runoff isn't the end of the world. It's just that we're not like removing material from the plant. We're making it easier for the plant to finish. And I also think in hydro, most of the time when you flush, you're flushing like the excess out to reset so you can have everything going 100% as well as possible. Good conversation. Flushing is a complicated one. Yater says, do you ever notice fibers falling on your plants when cutting the trellis nets? No. It's possible. There could be a little piece of microplastic. You know, they're pretty confident in the UV and all of the testing that they've done as far as microplastics coming off. So personally, do I ever notice fibers falling on your plants when cutting the trellis? No. John, question. How organic do you think Lotus products are? I use your craft blend in my original mix, but I feed with Lotus. I get great results. Just wondering if it really is organic. Thank you. I don't know what Lotus is. If I can pull up some ingredients, I will do it. Otherwise, I'm just going to say I don't know because I don't know what that brand is or anything. Lotus cannabis nutrients. Let me go there. Start shopping. Cocoa Core soil. Menu. Okay, now this isn't to pick on any brand, right? They could have great stuff. I have no idea. I'm just going to go look and see what one of their products has as far as ingredients. It'll tell me a lot. This is what I encourage you to do as well. So let's see what I got. Grow Pro Series Grow. Let's view the Grow. And let's see what the ingredients are if they list them. Just research, right? Although there's these really cool labels, usually there's only a few ingredients around the country that people are using. 14 separate ingredients, okay. What are they? I don't see the ingredients. Sometimes it's really hard to find on some of these sites, and typically that's a bad sign. All right, I'm only gonna spend a minute more. Dean might edit some of this slow stuff out if I can find the nutrients. I'm gonna talk about it. Let's see. Man, I cannot find ingredients. Well, what you can do is go to our blog at buildasoil.com. Go to the very bottom. You'll see our blog. Under education, we go over the reasons why we avoid certain ingredients like bone meal, things like that might seem normal, and you find out, wow, they don't come from organic sources. A lot of those ingredients are used in these companies that are making nutrients that pop up overnight. I would really go check that out and see if that vibes with you. Otherwise, you can message us and maybe I'll be able to do a little more research later on that particular product for you. All right, let's see. Scott says, have you ever hung the plant to dry from a fish scale and tracked the weight over time? No, but that's awesome. You know, there's people that have definitely done like whole plant weight. In fact, I've seen studies where people are like trying to compare differences in their cultivation, and I'll see them holding a whole plant wet and saying the weight. They're like, man, that's heavier than the last time. I'm like, how much water was in it? Did you just water? Did you not? Is there more biomass on that plant compared to flour? There's so many things where I'm like, that's crazy, I wouldn't do it. But from what you're asking, when I whole hang a plant, when it starts and over that whole 15 to 20 day dry period, what's the beginning weight, what's the end weight? That'd be really fun to do. I've not done it. I know there's averages as far as percentages that you can expect, but I've not personally done it, and I think that would be super fun. Maybe we'll consider doing it in the future. I did have a friend though that had fish hooks hanging across a beam in his garage, and that's where we would go hang plants, and I thought, man, it looks like a booby trap. All right, so Jones says, so with you using the auto pots and the blue mats with the reservoirs, do you need to clean them out after every grow? So the blue mat, it was just straight water the whole time, and it had a lid on. There was nothing in it. And so when I looked at it, it was perfectly clean. There was nothing for me to do. When it comes to the Autopot one, that was basically the same. However, because I was using just filtered water in there, there was a little bit of white like around the sides and stuff. I'd watered a lot more water through that one because I'd used that same reservoir for a previous Autopot run, and I cleaned it both times. Where the bucket that I was using for the blue mat, I didn't clean it all. But I would recommend cleaning everything if you think it needs it. But when you're using straight water, there's not very many reasons to do so. The Autopot tray, I'd probably clean that whole thing out. In fact, the one that I did use on the XXL, I'm gonna reuse this season 6. And I absolutely cleaned the whole thing out and sprayed water in there. I just don't want anything to get in that little float valve. So if you're adding nutrients or anything like that, like for instance, the first cycle we did the Autopot, I used the hard plastic ones and it was going anaerobic. So I added a whole bunch of Yahweh. I had to scrub everything when I was done because of that. So Silent Type says, is it okay to use food grade distilled white vinegar to lower pH and help water with calcium carbonate? Thanks. I'm sure it is. I just don't know if the amount of vinegar that you'd have to use to lower the pH would be too much and negatively affect the plants. But a lot of farmers out here use vinegar because the ditch water is so full of carbonates. And so when they add it, it pHs it by neutralizing those. And then it also liberates more calcium from the soil that may have been bound up in that calcium carbonate matrix. So it definitely can help. Another thing that people were doing for a while is they would activate like oyster shell flour using vinegar, and then they would use that solution in small amounts. So I will say that it's okay. But without knowing the proper amounts, I would say be careful and just test, all right? Cineo, how many plants would you recommend in that Tray to Grow raised bed? 2 or 3? So it's not as big as you might think. So now the earth box, it's like 7 gallons, maybe 10, where the Tray to Grow is like 25 gallons. So really it's more than 2 earth boxes, and I've put 2 plants in an earth box before. So you could probably fit 4 plants, but this is all personal preference. I think I'm gonna do 1 plant, planted on one side of the Tray to Grow, probably opposite side of where the water comes in so that I can check on that easily. And then what I'll do is I'll bend the plant from that end all the way and trellis it across the rest. However, if I had unlimited plant count, I'd probably just fill it up, right? Put a whole bunch of plants in there and flip sooner. I think based on plant count, based on ideals, like if I could run more plants in my tent, I'd put at least 2 per Tray to Grow, and that would make it more even as far as the canopy right away. But 2 to 4 would probably be my recommendation, and I think people will do great with 1. It's just a matter of how much veg time you want to have, right? So, also, I've not used the Tray to Grow yet, right? So, as soon as I use it, I see how explosive the stretch is when it's fully watered, if it's like the earth box. It may be that I recommend 2. Bake Shop, when do we get to see you do 16 different cultivars in one 4x4 bed? I'd love to, but 16's pushing it. I've been doing 16 plants or something like that, but they're not all in flower. And although the law is on our side and they've been here and they have no problems with what we're doing, I'm not gonna lie, there's a few times I'll wake up, it's pretty late at night, maybe I'm smoking and I'm like, man, I got a lot of seedlings down there right now and we're flowering. I'm gonna go get rid of some plant numbers. And so for me to run 16 in one 4x4 would mean that I would eliminate the other quadrants. And I just like doing more. And then personally, I would never do 16 cultivars in one 4x4 because it's a nightmare. I would prefer to do one 4x4 bed with 16 plants that are all the same after I'd hunted them. And what I would like to have plant numbers for is to hunt hundreds of seeds so that I could get to that bed of a monocrop that produced the fire. So that would be more my style. I know people like flavors and all that. I like to keep it to 1 cultivar per bed or a couple. You can do more, people do it. But as far as maximizing that yield along with, it makes it a lot harder. That is the end of the FAQ. If you've got questions about that or anything we discussed today, post it up in this video. We're gonna make tons more FAQs. We've got season 6 starting, and during that beginning, there's a little bit of a slow period, so I'd be happy to answer more of your questions. As always, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to ask me a question. Thanks for watching the videos. Thanks for being a part of our lives and the whole BuildASoil family team. Like really each one of us, our entire lives have been changed by the fact that you as a customer want to learn these skills and that you trust us to share this information with you. So thank you. And until next time, like, subscribe, tell all your friends, and I'll see you on the next BuildASoil FAQ video.